bear with me here.
Are you looking at this little formula?
For all
Statement.
belonging to A. What's P? The relational element there. PY. What's the arrow already? Does it mean can be?
If then, that's part of an if then statement.
If XPY, then I yes. Okay.
Yes. That's, I mean, pretty clear, I think. Oh, okay.
Right, we should be good to go.
Okay. All right. So the notation is borrowed or taken from Gottlieb Frege's notation for functions over arguments or relations. So the passing tone is a function that establishes the relation between arguments. In this case, I maintain that the third relationship expressed here as xy, and A is the set of all thirds, xy, the two members of the thirds, that can be arguments to the function p, which is passing tone. So the expression would be for every x and y that is an element of set A, xpy if ypx. Right? Does that not make sense? I think that's pretty clear, if not trivial. But, you know, sometimes trivial things are important. They just need to be said. But I don't think this has ever been said. And it's interesting that it can be stated in this way, because then we can either try to formally prove that the axiom is, there is a proof for it, or we can just like work it out to see if such a symmetrical relationship exists. Would you all agree that this defines some kind of symmetry?
What sense of the word?
Well, there's only one sense of the word. What is it?
It's more like commutativity.
Well, isn't that an aspect of symmetry? Could be, right? All right, so what were the three words I said about symmetries? Is that they can be transformed or translated, and the transformation must preserve the structure. So those are three critical words in defining a symmetry or defining symmetry. So the transformations must preserve the structure. All right. Now, there's a really amazing book, and it's called Why Beauty is Truth, and it's a book on mathematics, and it's by a well-known, well, maybe not well-known, but well-known writer about mathematics. And in it, he is trying to describe the nature of symmetry. And it occurred to me that, wow, this kind of symmetry that exists, that I maintain exists in music, can be expressed in a way that he expresses it. And that is, he explains symmetry by using the concept of, that basically looks like a what?
Triangle.
What kind of triangle? You have to use your imagination.
Isosceles?
Yeah, what?
Isosceles?
Really? Is it that off? Equilateral, right? Okay, you can imagine that. So I'm going to put the passing element at the top, and I'm going to put the conditioning environment at the bottom. You know, this would be your, according to the axiom, the x and the y, right? And it is this that puts it into some kind of relationship. Okay, are we clear so far? Then if we're looking at this as a symmetry, then the equilateral triangle has 6 different symmetries, right? There are 2 rotations and 3 mirrors. Now, what's the difference between a rotation and a mirror? That's actually kind of a trick question too, isn't it? What would be the rotations here? Let's say that, first of all, this would be equal to the identity. I mean, we could reverse this and say it's CAB, but I'm doing this ABC. Got it? So this is our identity. And then the two rotations
60
would be
and 100.
U and V. So what would be the identity? We have this. What would be the first rotation?
CAB.
Is
C in
it
the bottom left.
C, A up here, right? And B. All right, C, A, B. Are you all following this? Right? I mean, this is like 7th grade math, right? Okay. And then the other transformation would be what?
BCA.
Okay. So those are the rotations. And then the mirrors would be P, Q, R. Okay? And so what are the mirrors? You take the identity, the rotation 1 and the second rotation, and you form mirrors. The mirror image is formed by taking one corner, right, and keeping it the same and just turning it over. Okay? So let's apply that. The mirror of this would be what?
Collective bargaining agreement.
What? Would be what? I didn't hear it.
Sorry.
Okay, would be what?
CBA.
CBA. The mirror of U would be what?
BAC.
It's BAC, right? Okay, BAC.
Well,
And then the mirror of the V would be what?
ACB.
Yeah, I mean, it's stupid, okay? But it isn't stupid. Okay, now, you will see that in terms of the equilateral triangle, that in these rotations and in the mirrors, right, the structure is preserved, yeah? Now, do you know from your 6th grade math class, these are called what? Kind of transformations or translations. Yes?
permutations.
Well, they are permutations, but they're also called blank transformations. Begins with an L. Linear transformations, right? They're linear transformations. Now, I don't know whether my notion of linear is the same thing as it is in mathematics, but linear means line, right? So in these transformations, all the lines are kept or preserved, right? They're straight lines. They're not twisted. They're not turned. They could be painted black or blue or whatever, and that wouldn't make any difference. But the linear transformations preserve the lines, right? And in a topological situation, there are the kind of straight line things become unnecessary. It's just that the structure is preserved. All right, now let's see what would happen in the linear transformation of this progression. I'm asking you to think really, really carefully. But there are a couple of pieces of information that we need to review. It's easy to see how the identity here is transformed into this, yes? Well, tell me. Remember, when you are merging these things to try to construct a constituent or unit, you cannot look back, and there are some things that are unpronounced. Okay? All right, so this first, the identity element would be we can call it that, yes? So this is 1, 2, 3. Yeah? Okay? So what is the first rotation? How do we get that?
2, 3, 1.
I should really do this. Okay? Isn't that the first rotation? Yeah? Okay. Well, Okay, and how do we get the second rotation?
Dummy, right?
B, C, A. So this is going to be I, U, and V. Those are the rotations. Now let's get the mirrors. Then we would have what? This, right? P, Q would be what? Is that it? Correct me if I'm wrong. When I get to the blackboard, I know even less than I know. Right? And what is the last one?
Dummy, right?
B. Fairly consistent. Okay. All right. Now, those would be the 6 symmetries, right? Now, you know from your math class that you can do all kinds of permutations or combinations with these. And the basic permutations are these 6. Now, how do I get these in terms of my notation? This is obvious, is it not? I don't have enough. Let's go over here. And we're going to say I is expressed this way. And in the linear transformation or the linear expression, you indicate this. And this is part of my notation. So this would be do, re, mi. Isn't that what we have? Okay. All right. And then U would be what? How do we get that? Remember, you cannot look back. And we're looking at a linear transformation. So we have to have that. That would give you the first note, yes. And then we have to have this merge, which would give you this. Now, what goes where? This goes there, right? Because that's first. And then what happens? Do you go here, 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 and here? This is what we haven't made quite clear. It's got to be consistent. If it's coming from...
Doesn't it come from the top if it's U?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Maybe
we're
that
gonna,
was already said.
we're going to say that that's a repetition, yes? A redundancy.
Mm.
So we do not, you pronounce it in the highest position. So is it not, wait a minute, I may have this wrong. Yeah, no, that's correct, right? Is this not correct? Because this is ascending. Yeah? So this is not pronounced, that is not pronounced. Okay, that gives you that form. Right, but actually, if you're not pronouncing that, this is equal to that. You're clear about this? Do you understand what I'm doing? So there's been a merge operation here to give you this rotation. All right? So the second rotation is what? How do we get that? You're dealing with the same unit, yes? The same ABC. But they're going through a series of linear transformations. Well, how do we do this? How do we make this work? All right? Okay, so what is this transformation? Now you have to watch me carefully,
It's coming from
because I might make a mistake. Okay, so in this, where does the D come from?
from
C.
C.
You have to put that. That is first, and then what happens?
D is unpronounced.
It goes
To the second E and the first E is
to the E, right, here,
Yeah.
and then it goes to the D. Yes? Okay, and the C comes, wait a minute, we did notice right? Yeah, this is not pronounced, right?
C is not pronounced. Yeah.
The
goes
E is
to
not
that.
pronounced.
Right, because it's coming from C, so the C will be pronounced, right?
No, the C isn't pronounced, literally.
C isn't pronounced, the D goes to E, and then
The
it
E
ties
goes
over
to
to an
E.
E that's not pronounced.
The second E is not pronounced.
And
And
so,
that first C is not pronounced.
Why is, oh, I see.
because that's coming from there, right? Okay.
Well, from the first
For
one.
the first,
For the first C, the first C.
yeah, because it's in ascending passing tone, so
Well, this is going to here, right?
Yes, it's going there.
Okay. So is this coming from here?
How do we know which one it's coming from?
Well, because it's
'Cause it's-
ascending, so
okay.
it had to come from a C.
Oh, I see.
Right, it is ascending, right? Okay, it's going to E,
The one.
right? Does it not go to E? Well, then that is, well then what's wrong with this? We don't have the notation right.
Wouldn't the first E not be pronounced? And the second E?
This is ascending, right?
so the first E is pronounced on the first.
It's this, and then this, yes?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Now, what is the next one? The mirror. These are the mirrors, okay? That's pretty clear, right?
I have a question. Why? Oh, never mind. I see now.
Okay,
I was
and-
good. Okay, sorry.
are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, if you're not sure, you have to ask.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Why is it not VUI on the other side? Since I missed the first part of class, or is it a different kind of symmetry?
No,
That we're
we
talking
have an
about.
identity element, right?
Okay.
Now, there's a big discussion about identity. Well, we're claiming that is the identity. That is the original, what we're calling the original form, right? And from that, we generate the rotations and the mirror images, right, of the rotations, of the identity and the rotations. Okay, so
Okay, I see.
now we have, that's I, U, V, and then this is the first mirror, which is P, right? And go up here, and Q is what?
Raised
It's some kind of
descending
Yeah.
combination of this. Where does the D come from?
E.
It's got to come from E, so I think it's that, right? And then this C is over here, yes? Okay, so this is not pronounced.
No,
he's
that's
not
backwards. It's Re, Do, Mi. So the first Do is pronounced.
So the first Do and the second Mi are both pronounced in that symbol.
So this goes Re, Do.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. So Re, Do, and Mi. Nothing looks back. Okay, so the E is not pronounced?
Yes.
Okay. This is not pronounced. It will always look like that. Okay? And this is what? R and
Q.
PQ, yes. Okay. And the last one, okay, is Do, Mi, Re. Yeah? All right. So, what is this? It's Do, and then what?
Mi, Re.
Which Mi?
Second
Second.
one.
The second one, yes, so that's not pronounced. And then that is not pronounced. Okay? Is it clear about this? All right. Well, now, we can take these things and we can put ABC, and we can see that if you include the element that is not pronounced, right, that they all turn out to be the exact kind of asymmetries that are in that equilateral triangle, whatever. So there are 6 permutations. There are 2 rotations and the 3 mirror images. So if, let's see, the first mirror image is this, which is a mirror of the identity, right? Yep. And in music, that's what? If we see that in music, it becomes,
Inversion.
it's usually indicative of what? If you have more than one voice. If we combine this plus this, what do you get?
Voice exchange.
Yeah, a voice exchange, right? And every single one of these combinations, in one way or another, can form contrapuntal relationships with one another. And I think I guess it's kind of trivially obvious that this formation, or this conception, right, is a symmetry, right? Because this is the relational property, the function over these two arguments, which can be x, p, y, and let's say that, y, p, x. Yeah, either way. Now, what is it that I start talking in the book about the symmetry is broken? Now, what I mean by that is that there's an aspect which of these progressions that changes when the progression is temporalized. These are all linear progressions because it means that it creates a closed path within those three elements. Yes? But now, when it is temporalized, what happens? Why do I say that? This is on that page. Aspect of temporization break this symmetry. An empirical fact of an anisotropy of temporal processes, imposing the observed directional asymmetry on musicalistic structures.
It all becomes one and the same.
Well, it is the same, but when you add time to it, when you're moving through time, they cannot be reversed, right? So, have I said this correctly in here? Do you understand what I'm talking about? Isn't it true that Newton's laws can actually go in one direction or the other? Well, what causes them not to do that in as we observe nature or characteristic physical system, actual physical systems?
Well, if they could go in both directions, it would be like chaos. I mean,
Non-conservative forces.
What?
Non-conservative forces.
I don't know. That might be another way of. No, I think that's not right. But I don't know. What is the word I'm looking for?
Memory or retrospect.
Which of Newton's laws are we talking about?
Virtually all of them, right?
Well, because like an object keeps moving, keeps on in motion, that does go in every direction.
That goes in every direction?
It can.
Well,
I mean,
it
if I
can, but you
kick a
don't
ball
observe
way,
that
it
in the
keeps going that
universe.
way, and if I kick a ball that way, it keeps going that way.
Yeah, but but when I drop an egg on the floor and it breaks, is it going to unbreak itself and become the egg again?
Well, if you got a lot of glue and a lot of time, yes.
No, I mean, is it going
Not
to
in real life.
spontaneously do that?
Yeah.
No, it won't do that. So what keeps it from doing that?
Gravity.
Time.
It doesn't have it.
Who said that? Well, what is the arrow of time?
Entropy.
Yes,
ooh, yeah.
that is true. All right? So presumably it's the law of entropy that says that time has an arrow. What is entropy?
Everything becomes more like disorganized over time. That's about what I was describing.
Okay, if you want to express it that way. Do we have a better expression of entropy?
Second, I'm looking up.
At any rate, okay, well, you can find it out. What I'm trying to say is that in a hierarchical structuring of this, abstract, there is no aspect of linearization. When the mind constructs these things, or hierarchically and recursively constructs them, then it becomes the function of the sensory motor system to temporize them or to linearize them, creating a sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are you with me? But it's almost certain that the brain does not itself, when it computes this information, it's hierarchical and recursive, and linear order is not expressed. It's only when the information is transferred to the sensory motor system, or whatever mode it is that's going to express it, that the linearization takes place.
By the sensory motor system, does that include our hearing and how we
Absolutely.
perceive? So are you saying that we perceive, our brain perceives music sort of all at the same time? But we don't even realize that because the way that we are in contact with it is through our senses. And if we look at a score or hear people play, I don't know.
Well, okay. Well, think about it for a minute. In the cantus firmity that we have talked about, let me just put the simple example up here. This is not a good example, although it is. It's a difficult one.
Obviously,
Right? Wait a minute. Wait.
Okay.
Okay? In order to interpret those notes, you have to be able to hear, that has to be generated from there somehow. Right? And that this note is obviously connected to that.
Yeah.
In a very simple way, this shows you that musicalistic structure, this is very abstract, depends on structural distance rather than linear sequencing or counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because that is not how this is generated. This comes from an entirely different space that has been merged with these things. So I got tired of writing the treble clef, but that's okay. I love it. Okay? So this initial motion is produced like that, right? We've seen this. And so this is merged. This is not pronounced. That's not pronounced. That isn't even pronounced, right? Where does this D come from? If we can't look back, that's not pronounced either. This is coming from here, yeah? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, right? So this is going on, and this is being bounced along. We don't hear that, right? Now, this is a complicated thing. This generates a transformed consonants together, right? So these two tones actually are appearing together. Now, because they can appear together, and they do here, they can be transformed so that this can become that. And we've been through this 1,000 times. Well, who is the we? Various and sundry people. That is inside of this unit, and that is a transformed consonant. So that's been lifted out. That's been embedded in this structure. I mean, there is a way of interpreting this, the saying that you just have the merge of these third spaces. But I think that you would agree, didn't we go over this last week, or an example similar to it, that when you hear this, you hear these three notes joined together.
Yeah.
You don't hear it as, this E belonging to C. Right? To me, that's a clear indication that this is not linear sequencing. It's just not tone 1, tone 2, tone 3. That there's something else going on here that is generating the coherence or the structure of this. And your brain, when it hears this, has to be able to hear the structural distance over the linear sequencing. right? Now, in linguistics, people have, racked their brains trying to figure out what is the nature of the parser. The things in your mind, you obviously have to have it, that translates or makes sense out of the input. Right? When I'm speaking, there is no way that you are listening to every single word that I say and following it in a linear order.
Now we are.
What did I
There's
say
no
10
way.
minutes ago? What is the first word I said 10 minutes ago?
Linearization.
It could be. That's a poke in the dark. It could
I'll
be
check the
anything,
live stream
right?
afterwards.
Right?
Doesn't
What was
count.
the word I said about 8 words ago?
There is no
What?
way that you're listening to
No.
every word I say.
Well, I don't know
So
whether
the
that's
word
the
that I
8th
said.
word.
What?
You don't do that. What I'm trying to say is you do not perceive
Yeah.
structure like that.
The.
Okay? Well, you don't perceive structure like that. You're not listening to words. And then if you think that words are composed of subunits, phonemes, morphemes, good night, right? It's far more complex than anyone could possibly imagine, but it cannot possibly be just stimulus and response. There's no way that the information or that language could ever be processed like that.
It's like so complex that we can't actively think about it.
No, you don't have access to it. You have no idea what's going on. It's all done, well, that's what people think about me. He doesn't know what he's doing all the time. But I mean, it's clear that there's something other than linear sequencing going on. Okay? Now, are we all on the same page with that? I mean, I'm not trying to brainwash you into believing this. I'm just putting this out there because I happen to think that it is something you should believe. No, it's something that you should seriously consider and think about. And if you ponder this for a while, you'll understand what the mistakes have been in trying to generate a valid theory of music, let alone a theory of language or linguistic structure. If we are looking at musical structure just from the surface and naming things, saying this is this is that, what kind of approach is that? I'll give you 2 choices, empiricist or rational.
Empiricist.
Yes, of course it is. What you see is what you get, right? The rational view takes the opposite. It says that what you see on the surface, what's actually happening that produces the surface is hidden. And you have to discover what it might be. And you can make many different proposals. But what is his name? Charles Sanders Peirce said that the human brain has some kind of intuitive process where it limits the kind of hypotheses that it creates and that it chooses from those. And by experimentation comes the scientific process, the empirical results of an experiment. And I think it's very important that we understand that it is absolutely necessary to see the true in the false. To see the truth in the false. Isn't that one of the principles that science is founded on? I believe it is. Okay. All right. Now, let's briefly, for the next 3 hours, look at this 3-part solution up here. All right. Now, this was improvised, okay? Just made up. And then I wrote it down. But it has some rather interesting things in it, I think. All right? Where's the canus firmus? Wait a minute. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay. My notation, hides all that. I don't know what's going on. All right, so re la sol fa mi re.
Oh.
Yeah, it's one of these that has always bothered me. I don't know whether it's Fuchs or Jeppesen or somebody, but it's always bothered me because it sounds redundant. Yeah. So I've tried many different ways to eliminate that redundancy to see if there's another way of interpreting it. And does anybody recall what that is? My one interpretation is to look at this as that, right, as a transformed consonant. So that this is from the merge of these two things, then this is a passing tone, that's a passing tone, and then this is a passing tone inside of that. If you do that, it eliminates the redundancies. Right? So this D is actually belonging to whatever goal tone that is generating these consonances. Right? All right, that's one way to look at it. All right? You don't have to look at it that way, but that eliminates the redundancy. Okay, now, let's look at this three-part setting, and you'll see some interesting things in it. Now, right off the bat, what's the first thing you see?
Direct fifth.
Yes. You see that? Okay. Why is that not bad?
The contrary.
This, yes? The contrary motion eliminates that. All right. Is this sonority here, according to my principles, consonant or dissonant? It is a dissonant sonority, right? Okay. Now, let's move on to the next sonority. All right,
Voice
that,
exchange.
what?
Voice exchange with a 6 to 5.
Q.
Yes, it could very well be, right? So, now look, this is another amazingly interesting thing, that this cantus firmus, if we were to analyze it by itself, this is part of this, right? So, re, fa, la, that's a merge, you don't do that, okay? But now in this interpretation, with the outer voices, right? That no longer obtains, right? It has reinterpreted this inner voice, and it has reinterpreted it in the sense that this is a dissonant sonority prolonged by voice exchange, plus a 5 to 6. Yeah? Are you following all that?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Now, what about the next sonority?
I'm sorry. Where's the 5 to 6 is D to C?
All right, if this is a
I see.
do mi sol, it would be do mi la.
Got it.
Yeah, so this would be like 6 5. But that is these are dissonant sonorities, prolonged, transformed consonances. Okay, now what about this, Coward? Is this that?
No, because it's a passing tone within the.
Yes, it's inside of this. Once again, there appears to be some kind of voice exchange. Yes?
5, 6 motion.
What do you mean by that? There's something missing here, right? Isn't that supposed to be there?
Yes.
Right? That confirms or allows us to see that as a voice exchange. So, look, my interpretation of the cantus firmus and my suspicion that this is some kind of unit by itself. The two voices on the outside have clarified that that's what that is. At least that's how my ear has interpreted it when I've put the two voices above, the voice above and below. Yes? That is the power of the outer voices to reinterpret anything. It's just not a given. Right. Okay, we're following that? Now, is there, I know all these lines and everything is confusing. Is there another, like, voice leading thing that we need to consider here? I don't, well,
I mean, direct fifth, but contrary motion in the outer voice.
Yeah.
yes. Okay, this goes up, right? This is another fifth. Yes? Okay. But this is going up. All right?
And there's a 5-6-5 in the upper voice.
Well, let's think about this sonority for just a moment. All right. This is consonant. Remember, it always has to be consonant, dissonant, consonant. If it's not doing that, it's probably not coherent. Well, wow. This is one gigantic dissonant sonority, right? Well, we all agree with that? This is a transformed consonance here. So this is one unit. So that's consonant. This is dissonant. Well, now wait a minute. We might have a problem here because this note is actually a what? A dissonant. Well, can we have consonant, dissonant, dissonance?
If it's all grouped as one unit.
No.
It's
This doesn't belong. There are no notes in common here except for the D, right? Well, either something's wrong with this theory or we're not looking at something correctly.
There is a 5 to 6.
In here,
The A to B.
no. You have a D and a B flat up there, right? In what?
That's actually a 6 chord.
Well, it's on the degree 6, yes. What happens if this were to go here, right? If the bass were to go there. That is actually a consonance, yes? And then this is displaced by moving here, right? Right? So this is actually a transformed consonance which comes out of this consonant. Right? And then that's T on. Okay. All right, and then what about this?
Consonants.
Yeah, that is a consonant. Now, is that the correct tone up there at the top?
Sure.
Is it weird?
Yes.
Really?
Maybe it comes from D.
Well, correct in what?
Structurally.
Oh, no.
No, what should be the up there at the top?
F.
Yes, F should be up here. Re, mi, well, this goes fa, mi, re, I think, right? And then that's a repetition. All right? And then the fa, mi, re here, you can't have that because this is going there. There has to be other strategies to eliminate that. Actually, every voice potentially would do that because that's the strongest way, the force of gravity down, right? Okay, but it doesn't. This comes not there anymore, and this goes into the inner voice here, and this is la, si, do, re. That is a chromatic tone, an inflection, right? Okay. Now, two other things. You've got these hidden fifths or whatever, which are justified by the other voice moving in a different direction. And what about this note? What's the purpose of that tie? Is it just a common tone?
6 to 5. Or to highlight the 6 to 5.
It has to be a complete chord, right?
That has to be a complete chord,
Oh.
right? And that's the most, that's almost necessary to make that happen, if I've got this here, yes? So the tie is actually part of what? Is generated by the voice leading, right? So the tie is generated by a necessity of the voice leading, right?
Or someone could argue that you didn't have to have A in the chord prior. You could still have A in that penultimate chord without having a tie by substituting something else for the first one.
Well,
Like a fa.
you
I don't know
could.
what you would have to rearrange some things, but
You could
That
put a D
argument could
there,
be made.
right?
Or can you put an F there too?
parallel. Well, no.
Because it would be in contrary motion with the middle.
Any-
Whatever.
Not anything, but other things could happen if this were not directed like that. Now, I maintain that I am not, as I improvise this in my head, right? Which I always do, I'm not improvising it tone by tone. I have envisioned this whole thing. And then it linearizes itself in my thought processes. Now, I'm led to this point in the voice leading. So it is, in that sense, a choice. And the only choice that is here to continue this from this point of origin is to continue this note, to fulfill the requirement that you must have a complete and consonant sounding sonority, although this sonority is dissonant, yeah, which must lead to the closing consonants. Now, if we think about this, right, this becomes what? This is a consonance, transformed consonance, or dissonance. This becomes a consonance, this is a dissonance, and this is consonance. So we see on a large scale, it is consonant, dissonant, consonant, dissonant, consonants, right? Now, there are people that would disagree with this kind of analysis, but I think that this is far more revealing than just a contextual relationship of tones. And it occurred to me as I'm working this out, have been working this out, and the things that Schinker himself says in the second book of the Counterpoint when he's dealing with three-part structure, that in essence this is a composing out of a single, he calls it triad, or single boundary interval. And then it occurred to me, if you've read a lot of Chomsky, and if you've ever read the logical structure of linguistic theory, where he tries to rationalize it in terms of an algebraic form, right? That the phrase structure, grammar, is actually this kind of thing, where you only have one boundary being expanded or being prolonged. This is not music. It led Chomsky to believe that the concept of phrase structure was inadequate without certain transformational properties. And then that led to the advancement of generative theory into the so-called principles and parameters, where the differences in languages were, at their root, were the same, but most of the differences were in the sensory motor system. But word order and things like that, and the idea of embedding, were a result of transformational rules and things moving around and the embedding of different structures. Well, you see, even in the Cantus Firmus, the transformation of a dissonant interval into a consonance leads into much greater expansion. It's like a recursion. You're reapplying something that is controlling this on a smaller scale. So this is both embedding and recursion. Is this clear? Now, we looked at another example. Remember the combined species example that we looked at? Let's see if I can recreate that, and then we'll move on. I'm not sure that I can. Do you remember this? Isn't that it?
Middle voice might have gone to 5.
It did. There you go. Right? Okay, now, Schinker also talks about doubling, right? And that there is a difference between doubling and reinforcement. Well, we have no idea what has come before this in this example. But let's say that this is something in the middle of an example. Well, this could be this has to be then a result of what? Voice leading, right? And so this doubling is voice leading motivated. But it also creates a difficulty in understanding the relationship of consonance and dissonance. What should actually be not here? What should actually be there?
Like E.
What?
E. E.
Well, what kind of chord isn't supposed to
It
be
should be this, right?
One or the
Yeah.
other.
It should be that. Then this becomes that, right?
Yeah.
And then the dissonance straightens itself out, right? There's no big problem, right? This becomes consonant. This becomes a neighboring tone, right? Okay? All right, just like what we're doing. Okay, well, the result of this sonority here is due to, presumably, some kind of voice leading consideration. So, when you get to Bach chorales, and then you look at the theory book on page 9000, and it says, always hold the common tones, right? And what else does it say?
Don't double the third.
Don't double the third of chords, right? Those are like bogus rules. Doubling, or the approach to, doubling, is a result always of what? Voice leading, right? It's not a result of following some rule about the abstract nature of a triad, but it's tones in motion. So those rules need to be thrown out. The only situation where that might be valid would be the leading tone, right? You don't double the leading tone because it has a strong contrapuntal function. That's the one exception, perhaps. But as we talked about with someone yesterday, suppose I have this progression. Let's say the tonality is do, okay? And then we have this progression, right? Right? Now, what is the logical thing to put in between this?
Passing tone.
Yes, we're going to put the passing tone there. Uh-oh. You get an F on your assignment. Let's set this to add the other voices, right? We're in the keyboard harmony class, right? Okay?
Very far.
Sustain both all the way.
Yeah? Now, did I double the leading tone? The B is the leading tone if we're in C, right?
Well,
Suppose so.
What?
Yeah.
Is that functioning as a leading tone?
No.
well, what is the last chord? Like, what key are we even in?
Yeah.
It's not clear.
It says it's A minor.
Could be.
There we have,
Seven sharps and a key signature by naturals on that. Hear me.
Me do.
actually, I might do that, but I'm not. Okay. Well, is that okay? Yeah, I mean, come on, right? So this chord has nothing to do with the leading tone. That's an F, right? Yeah, okay.
Had to be.
So that's not a double leading tone. It does what to that A minor chord? It acts as a passing tone in between that. It has no leading tone function at all. So those kind of rules don't make any sense. Why don't they make any sense?
Because they're out of context.
Well, what is the context, though? They're out of the context of voice leading, but the context that generates those rules has to do with what?
Counterpoint?
No. Imagining that the triad is like an entity or a given quantity, that you're dealing with triads in, let's say, a Bach chorale, whatever. You are not dealing with triads, per se, as structural units. You are generating triadic structures on the basis of voice leading. And then those triadic structures are grouped together under principles of voice leading and recursive transformations. It's so important that you understand that, because if you don't see that, then there is no way to perceive a kind of rhythm that is generated by the alternation of consonant stress, dissonant, unstressed, consonant stress. You do not get the genuine rhythm that is so apparent and is a clue for learning any language of the prosodic structure. Rhythm is not banging on a can. That's meter. And that has some kind of organizational function. But the rhythm in a piece of music is generated by the interplay of consonants and dissonance. And this, I know this is the first time I've ever said this, right? But that is where the genuine rhythm comes from. If you are looking at a musicalistic structure as simple as a 4-part chorale, and you are interpreting it from the standpoint of an entity of triads that are hooked together, you will not see the interplay between the text and the actual rhythm in the sounds. Okay, enough of that. Are you with me so far? All right, so be it. All right. That's the words of the Pharaoh. It is written, so be it. Right? Okay, let's go. Let's change the pace now and do something that might actually be interesting. And what about Pontormo's Rainbow? Let's talk about that essay. Now, I love this. This is one of my favorite essays, and it is a companion, in a certain sense, to The Simple Heart. Now, did you all read this? Of course you read it. No? Okay, well, if just one person read it, other than me, I think we'll be good. All right? So, somebody tell me, if you read it, tell me what you think about it. What do you think it's about?
It's about lack of understanding, misrepresentation, frustration, and being silenced, and finding, synthesizing your, I don't, kind of the things that happen, things being synthesized in your mind too as you grow up, and things coming together in a way.
Right. And how's that? I think that's great. I think that's excellent. I think that's what he's saying. But what can thwart that capacity?
Well, it's also, there's an element in here being told how you're supposed to respond to something.
That is
as
what
opposed to your
thwarts
own
the-
response.
That's what thwarts the kind of natural ability that Oliver's talking about. Yes? And it's something that I try to invite you to consider. All right? Okay. Well, let's go through this, and I always have my favorite lines in this. And I think that's essentially the point of the article, although it's much more elaborate than that. And he said, this could never happen today, so you'll have to believe me when I tell you that I made it all the way into the 6th grade before a bunch of people whom I did not know, who weren't my family and weren't the government, tried to deprive me of something I really wanted for my own good. And it turns out to be that the thing that he really wanted was what?
Cartoons.
Yeah, he talks about it in terms of cartoons. Then later it says, I now suspect that those people, they were shrewder than I thought, because finally, since my parents were always more concerned with my thoughtfulness than with my goodness, I grew up well assured that I could decide what was good for me and maybe get it if I could get away with it. Now that isn't a trivial statement. It's actually loaded. Okay? Finally, since my parents were always more concerned with my thoughtfulness than with my goodness. What does that mean?
When you did things they wanted him, or when he did things, they wanted him to be more considerate of the people around him when he does that, instead of going for things that he think would give him gratification, just for that sake alone.
Well,
I read it more as being about that they were encouraging his sort of intellectual development over moral, what they define as goodness. But that
what
might
who
be
is they? The communists?
Or the communists.
I don't think it's the
I'm not sure that I'm reading
It's
this.
it's not the parents, right?
Well, he's talking specifically here in this sentence about his parents. But yes, in general it would be.
I think the parents wanted him to find his own truth through understanding, which is detached from notions of what's right and wrong, to experience that and develop an individual sense of that. I don't think his parents had a moral agenda either. Those are probably more things about in culture. I don't know.
Well, I think that the expression there that is significant is moral agenda. Now, this is where, right at the very beginning, where I think this reflects or is a reflection of or is a foil to the simple heart thing, but it's really the same idea. Now, didn't we talk about last week the kiss that makes us equal? And that transformed Felicity's life, right? And I consider that to be some kind of unmerited favor given on the part of Madame Maubin. And she didn't know she was doing that. But it had a tremendous effect on Felicity's life. And I said that is an aspect of what I feel is genuine morality. And so, what did you say about morality? A moral agenda. There's no agenda behind that. And instead of being prescriptive, right, it's a matter of trusting a person's ability to formulate what is just or what is equal or what is considerate or thoughtfulness or thoughtful. So obviously his parents didn't say, don't do that, you're bad. Or that's bad, don't do that. They might have, right? But they didn't. Apparently, they allowed him to understand that considerateness and that his own personal actions in relationship to others was a moral principle. At least that's what I get out of it. You get something else out of it? Well, if you do, don't say anything. Okay. I don't encourage people to talk in class. Okay, yeah. All right. Okay, don't buy that. Right, so I was shocked by my first encounter with communitarian righteousness. Oh, that's such an incredible phrase, right? I'm gonna blow it up and put it in front of the blackboard, and then put one of those red lines through it, right? It says not. What is communitarian righteousness?
Like goodness imposed on you by somebody else.
By a group.
Like essentially the opposite of like I think what his parents wanted for him.
Yes, it's a group decision. Isn't he talking about an aspect of societal values? Now look, the society has developed certain values that are not all bad or whatever, but generally by and large, he's talking about communitarian righteousness, a group of people that posits the difference between good behavior and bad behavior. And that could be anything from the kind of clothes you wear to any number of current topics, right? I need not go on. Okay. All right. So they moved to California from Dallas, Texas, where it's like 150 degrees, right? And he's in ecstasy, right? Who wouldn't be living by the beach and having hydrangeas and bougainvillea and fruit trees in your backyard and being able to run out of your house to the beach, right?
It's like the most beautiful image. The way he talks about like the smell of the flowers in his house and the air in California. Like I don't know, I totally know that too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so spot on, his description.
Well,
Colored light.
I know that also personally because my first trip to California was when I was barely 5 years old. And my relatives lived in the very place where he moved to. And one of my first experiences, besides being at the opening of Disneyland, was the Santa Monica Pier. That's always been an extraordinary, special place for me, and Santa Monica in general. And all of these things are true. I don't know if they're true right now, but I haven't been out there in like 5 or 6 years. But that made an indelible imprint on me. And I think this is so true. And then after creepy, prissy Dallas, the escalation of sensory and social information was so overwhelming that I would lie in bed at night in the sweet darkness, listening to the trucks rumbling on the Pacific Coast Highway and the murmur of the surf on the sand, and literally giggle. Well, I don't think I was giggling, but I still have these kind of experiences in Palm Beach, right? Both Brenda and I hate air conditioning, so we sleep with the windows open. And there are palm trees and all that right outside the window, and they blow around during the night. And then in the distance, what can you hear?
Ambulances.
No. The airplanes going overhead. No.
Oh.
You only hear that when the president is in town. No. No, in the distance, you hear the trains. Way in the distance. And that brings back very much a childhood memory from the South. I mean, you can't get away from trains in the South, right? Okay, so this is all very beautifully described. Now, then he describes the event that happened at school. And you should all relate to this also. That any time there was an event that you could get out of a class, boy, you took it, right?
And it was a trap.
At least I did. And apparently this was a trap because it was one of these, like, I think it was not exactly an interview. It was trying to get the child to say something that they wanted him to say. Yeah? And apparently, Mr. Hickey, which I think is really smart, kind of saw through it. Maybe he didn't see through it immediately, but he did. And he compares the woman that was interviewing him, sitting at like a baby desk, and she looked like huge, and compares her to June Cleaver. Now, I think that's a kind of unfair comparison because I love Ward and June Cleaver. You know who they are? You have no idea who those people are? Well, that shows you how ancient I am, I guess. What was the most popular television show? One of them in the 50s.
I Love Lucy.
That was one of them. Yeah, absolutely one of them. And the other one was what? There were many. The Donna Reed show, the Father Knows Best, all these 30-minute sitcoms, right? And the quintessential one was Leave It to Beaver.
Oh, I didn't think that was that popular. But
Are you kidding?
yeah.
I have every episode of Leave It to Beaver the minute they put them in digital form, right? It's like 20 CDs. Of course, that's the only thing I watch. All right, that's a family sitcom. I mean, the Beaver, Leave It to Beavers, the Ward, what were their names? Cleavers, right? Were like this perfect family that lived in a perfect neighborhood with a perfect lawn, and they all had perfect jobs, and they attended a perfect elementary school. The brother was in high school, and had perfect lawns. Everything was perfect, right? It was perfectly in black and white, too, right? And June Cleaver, even when she was making dinner or breakfast or pancakes in the kitchen in the morning, always had on a cocktail dress with pearls around her neck and looked like, well, perfect. Yeah? And so I think that he's after that kind of comparison, although that particular show actually, you know, was supposed to be instructive for young kids, which it was. And apparently those parents were never, you know, punishing or the kind of parents that his parents were not. They were always concerned with his thoughtfulness of others. At any rate, he compares that woman to June Cleaver in that kind of 1950s. Okay. And then he said it's like a Charlie Ray lady. Do you know who that is? When you read something like this, you should like look all these things up. You don't know what the allusions are. She's an actress. Look it up. When I was seated, she looked up with a big smile. We're on page 44. And called me Davy. Right? Ugh. And asked me if I liked animated cartoons. Well, that's the beginning of the end. All right. Well, look at the second paragraph. Well, then, she said, what did I think about Donald's relationship with his nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie? You ever watched Donald Duck? Maybe this is just so remote that you don't, doesn't make any impact on you. Did it bother me that he screamed at them all the time? Did this frighten me? Did it perhaps remind me of Mom or Dad?
Oh.
Now, this hits a button right for today. And what is she talking about? What's the general term here?
Emotional abuse.
But she's saying that watching the cartoons, did it bother me that he screamed at them all the time?
Psychoanalysis.
What are those things called that you're lectured about all the time in academic situations? Which I think is, especially in a college setting, just unbelievable.
Safe.
And what does that refer to? It begins with a T.
Title.
And it's part of a gun?
Trigger.
Trigger. Right? Oh, don't say that because it'll trigger like an emotional breakdown and, you know, somebody will run out and have 6 ice creams. And, you know, that's not good for you.
I got 6 ice creams.
Right. Okay. Now, I'm not getting into any kind of controversy about that kind of thing, right? Or the social justice thing. But, I mean, this is a statement about that, about the irrationality of some of those ideas. Okay, in the next paragraph, clearly this lady wanted to know stuff about my parents. And since in all my peregrinations, what's a peregrination?
Travel.
Yes, that's one of Charles Dickens' favorite words, through 5 states and 13 grammar schools, I'd never met any other adults who were even remotely like my mom and dad. Let's go to the next page, and he describes his mother at the top. My mother was always in the back room painting really bad paintings and reading books while she cooked dinner, setting the occasional paperback aflame, always starting up little businesses and telling me stuff about Maynard Keynes or Karl Marx when she gave me my allowance.
Oh.
Who is Maynard Keynes? Those of you that are like entrepreneurs.
All I know is he had a big impact on the concept of economics.
Yes. And what about his ideas in economics?
I don't know
Capitalism.
Macroeconomics. Yes, he's a capitalist, was a capitalist. And his theory about microeconomics was incredibly influential. He was a British economist, philosopher, whatever. And he was the one that said you could judge the health of a nation by its economy, looking at the GDP, gross domestic product, and by employment figures and price indexes and so forth and so on. And so you've got Keynes, and then you have Marx. What are the really basic ideas in Marx? Now this is an important thing that you should know. Karl Marx. What was his idea? When did Karl Marx live?
1840s.
Actually, Keynes was 19th century, right? Late 19th century, early 20th century.
Was Marx a little bit earlier? Or
Yeah.
right around the same time?
About the same time, give or take 10 or 20 years or so, right? Well, what were some of Karl Marx? Well, what was his basic idea?
Communism.
No.
Marxism.
Socialism.
Marxism. What the heck is? Excuse me. What the heck is Marxism? There are 2 terms that are critical in Marx's economic theory.
Proletariat.
Well, what is the proletariat?
The working class.
The working class, and what's the other term?
The peasant. Bourgeoisie.
Yes, bourgeois. Now, that's a rather different use of the term bourgeois in the Renaissance or post-Renaissance or the Enlightenment, or actually the Victorian period, early Victorian period. What is the bourgeois? It's also a different sense, kind of, in Thomas Mann, in
Dr. Faustus.
Dr. Faustus. Although it's clear that probably there were people in the first part of the 20th century that were using bourgeois in the same sense that Marx was using. Well, what was Marx's idea about the bourgeois? Who were they?
Upper middle class.
The ruling class, right? And actually that bourgeois was a result of what? The shift of economic power from,
Aristocracy.
yes, from the aristocracy to the rise of the merchant class, the people who've made a lot of money, right? Whether it's in mining, whether it's in textiles, whether it's in other industrial endeavors. Who were the wealthiest bourgeois people in Europe at the end of the 19th century? Two families. The Rothschilds, and you'll never guess this one. You might. The Wittgensteins.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, a lot more names from the U.S. come to mind at the end of the 19th century.
Well, I said
I know.
European. Right. Okay. All right. Well, what was the idea of Schoenberg? Or actually, it wasn't Schoenberg's idea. It was his sycophant. Don't tell. Strike that from the record. Adorno. Theodore Adorno. What was his definition of the bourgeois and why that was so bad?
Now are we going back to Faustus?
Well, we're just entertaining the idea of the bourgeois, which relates to what he's talking about.
We talked about that last time, right? Or maybe in one of our lessons.
Maybe. Well, refresh my memory.
Was he?
Or you refresh mine first.
Music, let's say, up through and including the Enlightenment, and also, even it was still around during the time of Wagner. Who was Wagner's big supporter? It certainly wasn't the bourgeois. It was what? King Ludwig of Bavaria, right? He bankrolled Wagner, right? That was beginning to wane or pass out of fashion and being replaced by these wealthy merchants who were able to support artists and musicians and culture in general. And what was Adorno's complaint about all of that?
That the bourgeois don't have good taste and so the artists don't have autonomy.
That they were controlling the artists, or that the bourgeois wanted pedestrian-like tastes. Well, that doesn't quite add up, because it's those people that supported all the major artists of the day. And they must have had some kind of taste.
Yeah.
But what is Adorno's complaint?
No one gives 12-tone a chance.
Well, that the only thing they were interested in is playing Beethoven. Right? Or tonal music. Right? Now, it's very interesting, and I've said this many times before, if you were to go to Vienna, let's say at the turn of the century, and you were to be able to peek into one of these wealthy merchant townhouses with like 40 rooms or whatever on a Sunday afternoon or any afternoon or evening, what you would probably typically find after dinner is a bunch of people sitting around and family members playing chamber music or any kind of music. Then on the weekends, you might have that same family having invited artists, philosophers, musicians, and you'd have a little Sunday afternoon soiree with reading of poetry, discussion of philosophical things, and then a concert of some sort. Right? That's a very bourgeois activity. Does that exist today? No.
Hardly. Sounds
You
nice.
think about the influence of the idea that the bourgeois culture, in that sense, was bad and needed to be changed.
I have heard stories, though. Actually, one story in particular where someone invited a couple of Curtis students, like a doctor in New York, to just sight read chamber music with him since he was an amateur musician. So, I think they did that once for pay, but
Once
Okay.
for pay.
multiple times probably.
Okay. All right. Then it says, my dad was more reliable in the realm of fiscal theory. He thought money was something you turned into music, and that music ideally was something you turned into money. It rarely worked out that way, but this at least we were of one mind. Okay, well, let's continue on. Let's go to the next page. These are questions that the person that's interviewing David asked. But June Cleaver wasn't buying this. She turned over a piece of paper and asked me about the Roadrunner cartoons. Did I like them? Yes, I did. Did I identify with the Roadrunner or the Coyote? Again, I wanted to tell her that I did not identify with cartoons. They were just cartoons. What does that mean?
Like the cartoons are just a representation of the
Well,
Well, he had-
okay,
he
we
had
can
the ability
we can
to
skip to that.
separate
The
this.
cartoons are some kind of representation, and how does he express that?
By comparing it to things we want to see versus things we want to see represented.
Yes. Did you read this?
Yeah, just now.
The whole thing?
Yeah,
Well, that's impressive.
thank you.
You might be a faster reader than I am.
I wouldn't count on it.
I would. Okay. So that's the point. And just say that again because I've already forgotten it.
He compared what he wanted to see represented with what he wanted to see. That was phrased worse.
Somebody find that line in here.
Well, he says that exactly on the page 48. That
Yeah.
might not be the first occurrence of it, but he, right below the break, he contrasts what we want to see represented, where blah blah blah. What we wanted to see was the wall of vibrant moving color.
Yeah, and I think he
Yes. Well, that's it.
mentions it
Right. Bottom of
explicitly.
page 47, right? Called that paragraph at the bottom of page 47. It was funny because it wasn't real cartoons, which is simply to say that the intimidated, abused, and betrayed children at Santa Monica Elementary at the dawn of the 1950s without the benefit of Lacan or Lacan or Derrida or Foucault or Julia Kristeva or any of those people managed to stumble upon an axiom of representation that continues to elude graduate students in cultural studies, to wit, that there is a vast and usually dialectical. What does dialectical mean?
Teaching? Or like,
Debatable.
no. No, maybe.
Well, you can say debatable. What's contrasting views, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The differences between that which we wish to see and that which we wish to see represented. That which we wish to see and that which we wish to see represented. That the responses elicited by representations are absolutely contingent upon their status as representations and upon our knowledge of the difference between actuality and representation. Now, there are a lot of things mixed up in this, and it's a humorous essay, but the thought behind this is anything but superficial. It's profound. And then continuing, because these are critical paragraphs, what we did not grasp, but was just exactly why the blazing spectacle of lawn-mowered cats, exploding puppies, talking ducks, and plummeting coyotes was so important to us. Today it's clear to me that I grew up in a generation of children whose first experience of adult responsibility involved the care of animals. Dogs, cats, horses, parakeets, snakes, whatever, all of whom we soon learned were breathlessly vulnerable if we didn't take care. Even if we did take care, we learned that those creatures whom we loved might in a moment decline into inarticulate suffering and die, be gone forever. Now, what else is he saying about the importance of this whole issue of seeing things as they are and seeing representations of things? What's important about this lesson? And this is why kids have pets. It's actually also why adults have pets. And that I'm convinced that Maji, my German Shepherd, is smarter than I am and loves me dearly. Right. What is he saying here? Doesn't relate really to animals.
Acknowledging
All of whom, we soon learned, were breathlessly vulnerable if we didn't take care. Even if you did take care, in a moment, they could decline into inarticulate suffering and die.
That we can learn responsibility by, right?
Responsibility to whom?
Well, to them, or to other people through practice.
People, yes. It's a moral lesson.
Our own vulnerability too.
What?
We see our own vulnerability in that too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Does this play back into thoughtfulness and goodness as well?
Yes, of course it does.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what we wanted to see represented were chatty, impervious animals. What we wanted to see, however, was that wall of vibrant, moving color, so we could experience the momentary redemption of its ahistorical, extra-linguistic, sensual embrace, that instantaneous, ravishing intimation of paradise that confirmed our lives in the moment. What is intimation? To intimate something.
To suggest.
Something very personal? No, just
To
kidding.
infer something.
What?
To like infer something.
Yes, to know indirectly. Right. Be aware of indirectly. Okay. In the next page. I already knew, of course, that the condition of being ravished by color was probably my principal disability as a writer, since color for a writer is finally less an attribute of language than a cure for it. Now, he's drifted to one of his famous topics, and it's one of mine that I haven't, pulled out of the box recently. But it is the whole idea of linguistic regress and deconstructionism. Now, that's a very popular attitude over there. Do you know any of the so-called deconstructionists? Any of those people? You know anything about deconstruction?
Possibly.
Who is Jacques Derrida, or Derrida as they call
Know the name and nothing about it.
it, or Julie Christie? Okay. I would like to read for you a passage from a work by Derrida. If I can find it. You don't know anything about these people? Deconstructionism? This is someone writing about Derrida, that is, on this track, right? Some college professor whose name I will not mention. Derrida argues that metaphysics affects the whole of philosophy from Plato onwards. Metaphysics creates dualistic oppositions and installs a hierarchy that unfortunately privileges one term of each dichotomy: presence before absence, speech before writing, and so on. The deconstructive strategy is to unmask these two sedimented ways of thinking, and it operates on them especially through two steps: reversing the dichotomies and attempting to corrupt the dichotomies themselves. The strategy also aims to show that there are undecidables, that is, something that cannot conform to either side of a dichotomy or opposition. Undecidability returns in a later period of Derrida's reflection when it is applied to reveal paradoxes involved in notions such as gift-giving or hospitality, whose conditions of possibility are at the same time their conditions of impossibility. Because of this, it is undecidable whether authentic giving or hospitality are either possible or impossible.
It makes me so angry that like Penn students are like paid to study this, like and like given like stipends and full scholarships. Graduate students.
Are they docked? Is there
Yeah,
pay docked per
that's a
period?
thing.
What?
Is there pay docked per period?
Or was it translated
I
from
don't know.
German?
Yeah,
You
Exactly.
seem silent.
It's one word.
You seem silent. Did that make any sense to you?
Was it supposed to?
Did you understand anything
I
of
don't
that?
think it's supposed to make sense. I think that's
Where did you
Yes.
where did you
Well,
find this passage?
I think in order to understand that passage, we need to deconstruct it and find all the dichotomies behind that.
Well, absolutely. But you see, language is not, I mean, the text is fluid, right? It has multiple inferences or references. So we have to deconstruct the text and we have to find out its accumulated barnacles, right? That's one strategy. What is a dichotomy?
like two things that are opposites.
Yeah, opposites. So what is the thing about gift giving and hospitality?
They're at odds with something.
Whether it's possible or impossible? Come on, think a little bit about it.
Where did you pull up that sentence so I can look
It's
at it
on
again?
something with it. I was looking up, a fragment from Derrida, and then I came across this spectacular description. And the thing is that these people try to write like that. You go try to read any Deleuze, the famous book on difference, right? Different similarities and similar differences. And Deleuze featured himself a mathematician, like all these people. And in their books, especially books by Lacan and other people, feature themselves as psychoanalysts or philosophers or whatever. They're riddled with mathematical formulae or equations. And what's his name? Alan Sokal has an incredible book. Alan Sokal was a mathematician at NYU, and he's incredibly brilliant. And he has a book that's called Fashionable Nonsense, and he goes through all of these people, and he shows where these people are making a little bit of sense, but then where they have misinterpreted or misrepresented mathematical or scientific formulae. And this little example by second generation is something that's related to that. When he's talking about gifts and hospitality, the possibility or impossibility of such things, what in the world is he talking about?
Is he saying that it's not like what we naturally want to do, or something?
I don't know. You tell me.
Like it's at odds with human nature. Or something?
The deconstructive strategy is to unmask these two sedimented ways of thinking.
Oh,
What is sedimented?
like culturally
Layered, right? Things that have drifted to the bottom and built up over time. That's one of the big, big things. I just said it. Deconstructing the barnacles in a text, right? And it operates on them especially through two steps. Reversing dichotomies and attempting to corrupt the dichotomies themselves. Well, if you're reversing a dichotomy, aren't you in a certain sense corrupting it?
Well, if you reverse
The original?
If you reverse the dichotomy, there's still a dichotomy.
Yeah, what?
Yeah. But you've corrupted one with the other and replaced them so they're the same.
Well, also, what exactly does reversing a dichotomy even do? Because it's still a dichotomy.
Are we back to the topic of symmetry now?
X, Y.
I don't know. There's so many things in this, and all this from a painting or cartoons. The strategy also aims to show that there are undecidables. Wow. That is, something that cannot conform to either side of a dichotomy or opposition. I have no idea what that means. Undecidability returns in a later period when it is applied to reveal paradoxes involved in notions such as gift giving or hospitality, whose conditions of possibility are at the same time their conditions of impossibility. If you can figure out what that means, be my guest. Come up here,
It-
take over.
It would be so
Have
much
you any
easier
idea what that means?
if he gave us like some more examples of what he's actually talking about. Like, is it human behavior or ideas or like events or what? It would be easier to make sense of it. But
Well, he's given you two examples that are aspects of human behavior, right? Gift giving or hospitality. I mean, I don't know any snakes that give gifts or extend hospitality.
I think it's kind of like avoiding addressing things head on. It's a very like convoluted. It's not getting at the it's like getting at the. It's on the periphery. There's no substance in looking at things that way.
I just like
What in a dichotomy way?
Yeah, like it's like investigating the void of. I mean that's not actually what you're doing, you know.
Well, what are you dealing with
He's
this?
talking. Well, if he's talking about what was it, gift giving or courtesy, then I mean, I'm not convinced that looking at it in the way that he described is actually has anything to do with what he's talking about.
Exactly. I think that he's saying something that actually has some kind of content, but they have no idea that they're saying that. Is that what you mean? Yes. That's very true. And that it's like gibberish. Because absolutely, gift giving and hospitality are interesting aspects of human behavior. But gift giving is gift giving. What is the motive behind gift giving is something radically different. Yes? That can be maybe investigated. But either you give a gift or you don't give a gift. Either the motive is intentional or it's not intentional. 9 times out of 10, it is always what? Intentional. But the kind of gift that makes people equal is
unintentional. As we
unintentional.
saw in the last story.
And this dissolves the dichotomy. But it's not an undecidability, is it? Absolutely not. Come on, all it takes is like a 8th grade logic to figure out that this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And it's not saying what it even attempts to say. Yes? I mean, I could be completely wrong. I mean, I haven't attended over there in a long while or witnessed anybody. But things like this are poison. They really are. And they are responsible for many of the behaviors that Mr. Hickey is describing in this essay. Right? And it actually predates the Gallican Revolution, where all these people came from. They came from Gaul. Right? Okay. All right. Well, at any rate, what's the whole point in all of this? How did you get to Pantorma?
Color palette.
He's talking about the importance of color, right? And color does kind of circumvent or go beyond or can't be expressed or represented in language, yeah? Although it is. In the first place, language is a representation. And the nature of the representation, nobody knows. It's abstract, right? Maybe that's what the deconstructionists are talking about. I think not. I don't think they even understand that. However, Mr. Hickey understands something really profound. And how does that relate to music? Are we clear about his concept of color? I wouldn't exactly use the word ineffable, but what does he say about color?
Like the way that colors are. Well, when he's talking about the Pantorma painting, the way that the colors are blended and mixed is analogous to syntax and language. sort of?
No.
No.
I
Darn it.
think like the color, what he talks about in his own writing is like the color is the content, and like it's just it's a way of illustrating kind of like the layers of conveying something, like the content and the expressivity of that through a medium like writing.
Yeah, he's trying to do that through writing.
Yeah.
But no matter how insightful, even with Flaubert, this is why this essay matches the Flaubert thing, because Flaubert was like so precise about the words that he chose. And it's like incredibly perfect. And that's an outstanding characteristic of Flaubert. To write and then revise and then rewrite and revise and rewrite until the words are as expressive and as compact and specific as possible. But it still doesn't approach the nature of color. And he says that there are only a few hundred words for color. And you all are aware that the color words in virtually every language are the same. You know that, yes? But then there are these things like teal or aquamarine or peach or azure, right? And those are attempts to describe the subtle variations that light absorption has on objects, or the reflection of light, or the non-reflection of light, or hospitality, or general, no. Okay? Now, how does this relate to music? Listen to this. There's an element of positivity in the visible world, and in color particularly, that totally eludes the historicity of language with its protocols of absence and polarity. That's a direct slam at Derrida and Foucault. The color red is an attribute of the world. It is always there. It is something other than the absence of yellow and blue. And thus, when that red becomes less red, it becomes more one or the other. It never exists in a linguistic condition of degradation or excess that must necessarily derive from our expectations. Ooh. Now those sentences make perfect sense. They're saying something important, and they say something about the relationship of color and painting and music. And what is that? And it's something that I point out many times and am trying to understand.
Well, essentially that it's real.
Yeah, well, it is. Well, I make a distinction between real and actual. Real is thingness, an attribution of thingness to something. And that exists psychologically. We think that the communist is thingness, right? And that leads to other things which are not so pleasant. But what is he saying about the intrinsic nature of color? What is the semantics of color, or the meaning of color? Now say what you're saying. That it has a realness, that we attribute a realness to it, right? But the intrinsic property of color is that it escapes linguistic definition.
Isn't that what he says on the bottom of page 50? Like it's a respite from language and history.
Yeah, well, it is. So does it have meaning?
Sometimes.
Well, I think if you see a stoplight and it's red, you wouldn't go, right?
Oh yeah.
I think it does. These things do have meaning.
You can attach meaning to it, yeah. But is it meaningful?
Well,
It's a different question entirely.
it's not always representative of something.
Well, it's not representative in the sense that language is representative.
I think it has meaning because it. Well, we can talk about what meaning is, but it has meaning because we experience it. Like there's a meaningfulness behind.
Well, why do you experience it? You create the experience. The experience is not out there. You yourself create
Yeah,
the
well, we
experience.
create it because we have the capacity to create it.
It's an aspect of our
Like-
perception.
If you can see and perceive,
Well, stop right there. If you can see, do all animals have color vision?
No.
Why do human beings have color vision? And what is it? What is the purpose of color vision?
well, I think this has. I mean, it all goes back to what he was saying about redeeming the human experience. Like we use these phenomenons that exist, that are not. Yeah, well, I mean, what he described about the nature of a color, for instance, and that the way our human perception of that is a reflection of our experience. It should somehow redeem
Well,
that.
stop there. It is a reflection of our, don't say experience, of our what?
Existence,
As what?
human being.
As human beings. The uniqueness of the properties of being a human being. Right. That's why it is redemptive. That's why it is, the human mind has intentional properties to it. And it's internal. Your thoughts are your thoughts. You create that world. And color is a way of creating that world. And when you experience color, you're actually reaffirming or redeeming your worth as an individual, as a human being. I believe that's what he's saying. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, and I think I also liked that he wrote about the uniqueness of significance of things to individuals as well. Because, like for instance, I have things hung up in my apartment, and I realized when I went home that everything's red, like the color palette, But I didn't plan that. But it's like so unified, and it just happened to be that way.
And that is a specifically human characteristic. It's a characteristic of the creative ability of human beings. Now, why does that relate to music? Well, we didn't answer the question, why is color vision important from a survival or biological point?
Grass is green, and if we're red-green colorblind, it's harder to spot predators.
Okay? So it, technically then, what does it do? It increases contrast in objects, right? Okay. Well now, how does that relate to music? Hickey says that it is beyond the historicity of language and the regress or the absence or whatever. In other words, that we can't express the experience of color creatively. That's something that's internal and individual, is it not? But it's something that all human beings share. Well, the mental properties that create language is something that all human beings share. But there's a significant difference with language and color and with music. What is the difference? If we apply a theory of meaning to color, we don't get anything because it is internal. We have that ability and we use it in our sense as our internal, and we create an experience out of that, creative experience. But it has no semantic properties like is presumed in language. Language has a semantic property, but it's syntactical, and I'll stand by that until the last bridge burns down, right? That semantics in language originates in syntactical relationships, the same as it does in a computer language. That is the only way in which you can define meaning. Does music and or color have those same attributes?
I mean, music has some syntactical qualities.
Well,
And structure.
doesn't color also have those properties?
But no semantics.
I don't think you can really say that about it.
Well, does color have a semantic property in the sense that I'm talking about?
Only under certain lenses.
What do you?
If they're made for like that property, like if red is attributed to have some sort of attribute that we're supposed to identify with, and yet, like red means stop, for instance.
There's
No,
no
that's
elements
that
of
theory of meaning
consonants
that
and
is
dissonance
that's
and
undefinable, actually incoherent.
Well, it's because like different colors like exist in different but like they don't like relate to each other. They're not like, and there's not like a hierarchy of like smaller units that can be combined and everything, the way that it's possible in music or
Are
language.
you sure?
I mean, unless you're talking about like, in scientific.
What's the combination of
Right.
yellow and blue?
Green.
Doesn't he describe Pontormo's redness, bluish red? Any rate,
Okay, well that's.
what is the idea of connection with music? Music has no semantics in that conventional sense, right? But it does have an internal semantic, just like I'm sure color does, right?
But if you combine like elements of language, like you get something more complex, but it is often more coherent. But if you combine many different colors, I might be on the wrong track, but it doesn't always sort of have the same results. I think I'm on the wrong track.
Well, we could untwist that, I
Yeah.
think, and make something out of it.
Should go actually.
Okay, well, I won't see you now for a couple of weeks. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and I'm very thankful for all of you and the opportunity to just come in contact with you. And I just want you to know that. I say that all the time. And it's a great honor and a privilege to sit in the same room with you. And this year especially is when people are here. It's a thrilling experience and a innovating and thrilling experience, and I really appreciate that. So have a wonderful 2-day holiday, and I will see you the week of December 4th. Okay? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah.
At
Yeah,
like
like
9:45.
at 9:45.